Um, I want to welcome you all to our first book club event of 2022. We had our book club in 2021, and I see some returning faces here, which is awesome. I think you will all enjoy this experience. The way it works for the newbies here, we have an author every single month. Tonight, it's Harvey Ovshinsky. He's the lucky one who gets to go first. And we have partnered with the Wayne State University Press to bring these wonderful authors to you. And if you're part of our book club, you'll get a special 30% discount and opportunity to win a copy of the book. If you stay on the Zoom till the very end, we will have a giveaway. Before we go to Harvey, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Williams, who's the executive director of the Wayne State University Press, who we thank so much for partnering with us for this wonderful book club. So Stephanie, if you'd like to introduce yourself, go for it.
I am, in fact, Stephanie Williams, director of Wayne State University Press, and we are thrilled to collaborate with the Detroit Writing Room on this series of book club events, and even more excited that it begins with Scratching the Surface, which was one of the books that that was published after I arrived in Detroit. I am a newcomer to Detroit from Louisiana, and so it kind of helped me get a feel for the eras covered by the time covered by the book. So welcome, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Steph.
The way this works is Harvey's going to give a book talk, and then afterward we'll open it up to Q&A. If you have a question, you can put your name in the chat box and I'll call on you, or you can raise your hand and I'll see you as well. You'll be able to unmute yourself to ask your question. But I don't want to take up any more time because I want to get to Harvey's talk. Without further ado, Harvey Ovshinsky, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really excited to hear all about your memoir. Feel free to take it away.
Thank you very much, Stephanie's. I appreciate it. To both the writing room and also to Wayne State University Press, not only my publisher, but the co-sponsor of the book club. Thanks so much for the invite. It's good to be here with my fellow writers and my sister writers and readers, by the way. One of the best things I like about this book club is it's not for authors only, it's also for readers, which gives us a chance to engage with each other on our different perspectives. And for a writer, it's also very important because writing is such a solitary activity. I was going to say lonely, but that's not true. We have so many voices up here, so many characters, right, in our heads to keep us company. I'm never alone, but it does get, you miss the company. Seeing all these faces, I've been waiting a long time for this. This is my idea of a good time. But here's what they don't teach us in creativity school. That's how I'm going to start. What they don't teach us in creativity school, and what I've learned in the writing of this book and in my past storytelling attempts. They don't teach us how to write our hearts out and earn a living doing it. How to write our hearts out and earn a living doing it. I love the works of George Bernard Shaw. I'm a real fan, but he and I parted company when it came to his version of how to live a creative life while putting food on the table. The true artist, he insisted, will let his wife starve, his children go barefoot, his mother drudge for his living at 70, sooner than work at anything but his art. You know, I love my work, but I also love life. So that's where we parted company, which is one of the reasons I end up writing a book, not only recalling my adventures in storytelling, but also in really what I learned over the years about how to live a creative life and get paid for it. And I think that's a value to all of us. And especially, by the way, because some of us are older than others, to our children and grandchildren who may have the knack, even the urge to write and be creative and become an artist, but they don't know where to start or how to do both. And that's one of the sub themes of Scratching the Surface. Where to begin? Why this book? Why now? Where was my fire? Where was the urgency that I felt the need to write this book? Because I've been doing this a long time. It's a long story, but let's start in the middle. In 2004, the Detroit Docks International Film Festival honored me with their first ever Lifetime Achievement Award. The Metro Times was very generous in their praise, not only of the event, but also in my work, which they described first as a print and then a radio journalist, and then as a documentary director, and eventually as a teacher. They described that journey as a, quote, colorful and fantastic voyage, at times brave and visionary. Very cool, yes, I loved that. That made me feel very good for about 5 seconds. I was grateful for the attention and the praise, but I knew that wasn't the full story, wasn't my full story, not really. And this, and I'll tell you why from the preface of Scratching the Surface, it gnawed at me. Although I had a knack, a gift even, for asking questions that got to the heart of a story, after so many years of asking other people questions and telling my stories, excuse me, with their answers, essentially spinning my yarns with their threads, I started to feel more than just a little guilty. And I also felt like something was missing from my storytelling, long absent. And that was a voice that I had never paid much attention to before, and that was my own. There's an irony here, and I think Mrs. Martin, Noreen, my teacher, and Uncle Herb and others who know me, especially you, Ann, because you watched me in action when I was teaching, I've always lived my creative life in italics. My outside voice was brave, it's bold, it's energetic, it's passionate. But when it comes to sharing my inside voice with anyone other than my family or close friends, I tended to clam up. And it was a habit I learned at a very early age. As a veteran of my parents' bloody separation and divorce, a dark and tumultuous era in my life. And I refer to it in the book, not so affectionately, as the 7-Year War. I'm not going to bore you all the details. The book can do that. But I also wanted to give you a sense of what it was like that led my wanting to, felt the need to clam up. I always knew, and it just wasn't the divorce, by the way, that's not fair. That's only part of the story. I grew up knowing there was something in my family different about my younger brother. I loved him, he loved me, but I didn't get him. I didn't know, was he deaf? Was that why he couldn't talk? Or was he simply, as my mother tried to explain to this young'un, delayed in his cognitive and communicative skills? I didn't know what that meant, but I took her word for it. It was a mystery, and a painful one, I suspect, for him as well as me. Why did my brother, when he was young, seem so frightened all the time? At all hours of the day, he would, we shared rooms, so he would turn on the light on and off, and he would ward off imaginary terrors, which I couldn't even imagine. It's only a squirrel when we played outside Dale. It's only a squirrel. It's not as if it's a dragon, because it was to me a squirrel. Fortunately, by the way, he grew out of it. But back then, I felt it was my job to fulfill my role in the family, especially during the divorce. My role as the acquiescent middle child, doing whatever I could to not draw attention to myself. The one time I did break character and I talked to my mom, I spoke up for myself. I actually said, Mom, Dale he's scary. He's frightening me, and I don't know what to do about it. And she tried to lend a sympathetic ear, but unfortunately, Mom's war-weary response was less than comforting. Yes, Harvey. And this is the punchline. Yes, Harvey, she sighed, wetting her thumb, trying to remove, unsuccessfully, my worry wrinkles. Yes, Harvey, but can you imagine how he must feel? I got the message, and it wasn't just at home, and it wasn't about just a divorce and just my brother. There was so much going on in school, including in school, and maybe especially. I know you're eager to participate, my elementary school music teacher once told me after I began singing my heart out. But Harvey, you're not contributing. Better to sing to yourself than mouth the words. I know, right? So fortunately, here's the good news. My inside voice was loud and clear and firing on all cylinders, especially once I discovered the art of magical thinking, which is a real gift for anyone who says they want to write or create on any level. So I discovered the art of wishful thinking. I used what I called my pickle power to help relieve the stress and get me out of my real life jams and pickles. For example, I once used my pickle power to imagine Walt Disney with the time created Walt Disney Presents back in the 50s. And I wondered, what he was up to, because I believed he was covertly recording my every move, and that it was only a matter of time before one of his talent scouts would shine a light on me and offer to fly me to Disneyland for an audition. Magical thinking. It was a lovely fantasy, and I enjoyed recalling it and scratching. We've been keeping an eye on you, Harvey, I fantasized Uncle Walt saying to me as he took me aside and wrapped his arm around my shoulder. You're very talented, I must say. You're impressed. But there's more. Cubby is leaving the show, I imagine Uncle Walt telling me, and we're looking for someone to replace him. Are you available? Was I ever? So my outside voice was pretty quiet. My inside voice was on fire. My pickle power I used whenever I could. But unfortunately, my skills as a wishful thinker did not improve with age, because I had to find another way to express myself. It wasn't enough to think this stuff. One time I found myself about to be harassed by the neighborhood bully. My outside voice, as was its nature, chose not to get involved, not to speak up. But my inside voice, the one in my head, was more than happy to pipe in with a splendid, albeit silent curse. When neither approach worked, my nemesis, his fists clenched, continued to march in my direction, and I decided it was time to rethink my strategy. And that's when I made the decision that wishful thinking was no longer an option for me, that if I ever had any hope of surviving the blitz that was my childhood, the only magic I could count on was not the words that I kept to myself, but the ones I said out loud, at least on paper. Enough preamble, let's get to the Constitution. That was the moment I started to put pen to carbon paper. I began publishing in the Creative Boys Club. I was 12 years old. Don't be offended. There weren't any girls. There were very few boys. All I cared about was publishing the paper. Butch Ewing's club seemed to have a nice meeting place, I wrote, in one of my first ever editorials. They talk, they look at maps and a microscope, but if you look at our last issue, you will see that everything they do, they've done before. It was a gossip sheet, but it gave me some element of control. For this cub reporter, reporting on other people's activities, other people's stories, was very satisfying. And it became my flight plan. Writing became a flight plan. And it didn't take long for me to discover that whenever I took off like Icarus, I could use my winged words to get high. I was happy writing. It was a pleasure to write. Not only because of the pleasure of writing, I also learned quickly enough that there was some value in this writing stuff, putting best words in best order. At one time I had a chance to test this theory. My dad, God love him, was an avid reader, but he was so frustrated because I was being held back in school for not being able to read up to my grade. And so he threatened to take away my comic book collection. And I was sad and I was furious, but no amount of cajoling would change his mind. Reading comics is a waste of your time, Dad would say, because it's not real reading. Real reading. Didn't he understand? Didn't my father know that as impressed as I was with Superman, it was his alter ego, Clark Kent, who made the impression, who I bought every 10-cent issue from DC Comics to see what Clark was up to, because he was a writer, a real writer, and a journalist. So anyway, I wrote a letter to my father. I wrote a letter, words on paper. And I said, Dad, and I still had a copy. Daddy, I know reading is important to you, and I'm sorry I'm not better at it. I won't give you the misspellings, but I feel good when I read my comics and trade them with my friend Bobby Hagopian. Can we negotiate? How about a compromise? So whether it was my negotiating skills or my mother intervening on my behalf, he did say, yeah, okay, let's split the difference, you know. And we agreed that I would continue to read my Lois Lane and Superman, Clark Kent comics, but I'd also have to agree to read classic illustrated comics based on the books that my father valued, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and Call of the Wild, and H.G. Wells, The Time Machine, and just The Count of Monte Cristo. And that was a compromise. And I still have. I got my comics back, and I got his too. This is so cool. And my favorite, by the way, Knights of the Round Table, a book that I quote frequently in Scratching the Surface for reasons for those of you who have read it can imagine. Excuse me. But here was the problem. As much as I enjoyed writing, needed to write, wrote up a storm, poems, plays, short stories. It wasn't enough. I didn't want to dabble in this newfound passion that I felt inside and out. I wanted to become good at it. So I made a decision to write. I was 13, I gave myself my own bar mitzvah present. I wrote to my favorite writer, Rod Serling, who created The Twilight Zone. And I was very curious, Mr. Serling, how do you do it? What's your secret? What can you tell me that I can learn so I can become like you, a successful professional writer? Excuse me. I would mute, but it would require to distract myself, and I'm not going to do that because I'm on a roll. Dear Harvey, my hero wrote back within weeks. Thank you for your letter. I'm always reluctant to advise young people on their writing careers because there aren't any magic words, no magic rules, darn, to follow to ensure your success, but I will gladly answer your questions. I learned how to write by writing. To become a good writer, you must practice your craft diligently. Writing involves rigid discipline. The novice must not only possess a basic talent, but must have a sincere desire to write. There are several disadvantages to writing. I didn't want to hear them, but I asked him and he told me. Practically every writer has a period of rejections, which can be terribly disappointing and frustrating. Many writers go through a stale period where ideas just don't come, plots go wrong, etc. I think the main advantage to writing is its creative aspect. To a writer, nothing is more rewarding than seeing his name in print. It's a thrill and a sense of accomplishment that has never paled for me. And here's what made an impression the most. And I quoted in all my workshops and all my classes. The main thing to remember is that writing mirrors life, which encompasses so many things. Therefore, the standard rule to observe when you begin your education is to consider a whole education. Don't limit yourself just to the subjects that you take. Don't simply take writing per se, because you don't just write about writing, Harvey. He called me Harvey. You write about the world and everything in it, everyone in it. Cram every bit of knowledge into your head. Ultimately, it will be grist for your writing mill. Much good luck to you, and I hope this has helped you. Lordy, did it help me. Just what I needed when I needed it. But enough backstory. That was then, this is now. I'd like to share with you the other point of my talk, and then eventually we'll get to your questions because I do want to talk to you. I haven't discussed this with anyone else. Well, okay, Mrs. Martin. Noreen, where are you? There you are. I sent every draft. Poor Noreen. There are dozens of drafts of Scratching the Surface. I sent every one of them to her. And she was kind enough to give me feedback and give me some advice, which I still pay attention to this day. But we never discussed this part, Noreen, I think. So I guess it's safe to talk about it here. This is the writing room here. What happens in the book club stays in the book club. So I can dish if you won't tell. As much as I love Scratching the Surface, it was not my first choice for a title. That thought never occurred. What? How could you not? It's perfect. No, not right away. Not for a while. I'm a serial rewriter. Because here's the moral of the story. And again, something else they don't teach us in creative school, as much as we wish otherwise, it often ends up that the projects that we begin aren't necessarily the ones that we complete when the process is over. In other words, we may wish it otherwise, but that poem, that story, that play, that movie, that Facebook page, that posting that you posted this morning, started out fine, but eventually it's not always the one that we want to publish. Has that ever happened to you guys? Shake your head, writers. Have you started one effort and didn't recognize it or didn't like it, or worse, someone told you they didn't like it and you had to rethink it? Is that an alien concept to you? I see some shaking. I'll take it. So anyway, you know what I'm talking about. You get the gist. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. That's my point. At least in my case, it wasn't. And I'll tell you why. One of my other heroes, other than Rod Serling, Noreen Martin, and Paul Krasner, it's another story. One of my other heroes was Nobel Prize winner Isaac Bashevis Singer, who once wrote that every writer needs an address. I love it. Every writer needs an address. Never thought of it that way. And for me, living and working in a city like Detroit, so famous for its genetically encoded apocalypse-resistant survival gene, how else can I describe it, has been great practice for how to endure the tumultuous peaks and valleys and challenges that come from attempting to live a creative life and put food on the table. The problem is, Detroit may be a phoenix rising, and it continues to, despite the wrath of the Omicron variants. But in its attempt at renewal, it won't rise to meet you. It won't even be grateful necessarily for the effort. If you're looking for a welcome mat, you come to the wrong place. Being an artist in this town, I discovered, especially one who's trying to earn a living doing it, it's like being a kid in a munition store, not a candy shop, a munition store. It can be that terrifying. And when it isn't, that exhilarating. It can feel that terrifying when it isn't that exhilarating, which is why, and here's my point, the original proposal that I wrote for, well, Stephanie wasn't here, but she'll know about this. The one I wrote 6 years ago in 2016, back in the day for Wayne State University Press, the title that I pitched them was this: Detroit and the Art of the Impossible. Detroit and the Art of the Impossible. Because, I think you should write what you know about, but you also should write what you care about deeply. And for me, the city has always been a model. Most artists are infatuated with their muses, not me. Inspired by their charm and their beauty and their splendor. I wrote this in the pitch to Wayne State University Press. I've always identified with Detroit, but not just with its wounds, but also and mainly the city's determined and resolute spirit, its gift for rough magic, as Shakespeare would call it, that's required to endure and recover from the scars and wounds of its history. The Borg had it wrong in Star Trek. The Borg had it wrong because in Detroit, resistance is fertile. Now, some of you will get it and some of you won't. Look up the quote. It makes perfect sense. Jeff and Margaret, and I see some others laughing at that. You get it. Oh, in Star Trek, they said, the enemy said resistance is futile. Give it up. Well, in Detroit, resistance, from my perspective, is fertile because our rough magic is topsy-turvy, upside down, inside out, topsy-turvy. Because in this town, now you don't see it, and now you do. Now you don't see it, and now you do. Which describes how I've always felt about my hometown, and regardless of media, platform, or genre, I've always sought out stories that tackle hard, impossible, seemingly hopeless situations. I was going to give you an example by reading an excerpt from the book about my documentary I produced about Tyree Guyton, the folk art, he would object to that. The artist who on Heidelberg Street is reinventing the street and reimagining it with found art objects. It's a great part of the book, but I really want to get to your question. So I'm going to skip that. It's in the book. My point was that one of the reasons I identified so much with Tyree's work, his stone soup approach, I called it, to problem solving and the role creativity plays in the process, Reminded me of the classic joke about two brothers stuck in a room full of horse manure. Full of horse manure. And all one child can do is wail and moan and pull his hair out, but the other brother, instead of whining and complaining and confetching, immediately gets busy rolling up his sleeves and starts to do something about his seemingly impossible situation and to fix whatever and find whatever was missing from this picture. "What are you doing?" screams his brother. "Can't you see we're stuck in a room full of horse shit?" "Yes," his brother squeals with delight. "And there must be a pony." Now that's it's still, I don't know, was it Groucho Marx? Was it, Woody Allen? Who told this joke? Was it Mel, Mel, somebody told it. But anyway, that's how I've always felt about stories. There must be a pony. Which brings me back to whatever happened to my original story crush. And then we'll wind down. Detroit and the Art of the Impossible. Okay, in screenwriting, this is a part of the movie where it's called a spin. It's a plot point so big, so huge, so major that it changes everything. Nothing is the same in the story once a plot spin gets its grip on the viewers. So what was my book's spin? After writing dozens of first drafts of what was then called Detroit and the Art of the Impossible, each one in my mind more brilliant, more perfect than the other. How shall I put this? By quoting Oscar Wilde. That's what I'll do. He once asked, "How can you tell the difference between an enemy and a friend?" "How can you tell a difference between a friend and an enemy?" "Easy," he said. "A friend," Wilde insisted, "will stab you in the front." A friend will stab you in the front. I know this because what I thought was the final draft of my masterwork, my friends, Bill Pace, my creative production partner, and my friend Bill McGraw, a wonderful, brilliant writer and a reporter for the Free Press, Paul Leinert from Reuters, Jack Lessenberry. I called on favors from everybody. They read the book, they read the draft, and they were, well, how should I say this? Detroit and the Art of the Impossible. Great title. They loved it. Great title, Harvey. Wrong book. Great title, file it away, wrong book. You're barking up the wrong tree. And they wouldn't let it go. "Forget about Detroit," they said. "Poor Detroit," they scolded me ever so gently, really. "That book has already been written dozens of times. Been there, done that. Is that really the story you need to get off your chest? Is that really the story you need to get off your chest? Shoot. I hate being found out. What are you afraid of?" And they really scratched the surface. "What are you afraid of, Harvey?" They wouldn't let it go. "Stop hiding behind the city in your writing. Whose story is this? Whose guts do you want to spill? Because if you can't answer that question, if you're not ready to put your face on the cover of your book, then maybe you're not really, you shouldn't be writing a memoir. Consider a novel or a short story, or a textbook, because you are not ready to write a memoir." And I knew what they were talking about. Intellectually, I know this. And Anne Rock, you'll appreciate this. There you are, Anne. Because I taught your children, your son and your daughter, this. When I taught creative writing to Anne's kids and hundreds of other children at the Grosse Pointe Academy, I created an imaginary line of what I called write-a-mins. Write-a-mins. They're like vitamins, only much more potent. And they're not commands, they're not orders. They're playful suggestions, observations, affirmatives, affirmations, that sugar-coated them in the form of an acronym, like "Don't Stop," DSGF. Don't stop, Stephanie Steinberg. Don't stop, go further. Noreen, don't stop, go further. Write them in DSGF. I have hundreds of them, okay? Or here's one that I always enjoyed. I appreciate the excellent information in your essay, I would tell Ashley. There was always an Ashley in my classes, Grosse Pointe. But where are you in your report? Where did you go? Write them in WA. Where's Ashley? And that's why in mulling over the feedback, my friends I was getting, I was getting from my front stabbing friends. I need to ask myself, whose memoir was it? Where's my Reitiman? W.H. Where's Harvey? In the end, it was my developmental editor, Ronit Wagman, who held my hand and helped guided me through the multiple rewrites that were required to finish the book. But naked was our battle cry. Ronit reminded me of the time when I recalled in the book, after transferring from Detroit's spanking new Henry Ford High School, I was shocked to discover that at Mumford, the boys swam in the nude. At least that's what I called it. Naked. One of my gym teachers tried to correct me. I don't know what they taught you at friggin' Henry Ford, Mr. Ovshinsky, but here at Mumford, we swim butt naked, which is what Ronit wanted me to do in reconstructing, reimagining, rethinking this book that I said I wanted to be a memoir, butt naked. Thank you, Ronit. I still have the scars. No, seriously, she's great. She's wonderful. So here's the moral of this part of the story. It took me 4 years to write Scratching the Surface, what eventually became Scratching the Surface. 2 years to write a bad book, 2 more years to write a good book. For me, I'm a serial rewriter. That's what it took for me to get the job done. And whenever I grew weary and felt like zipping up my lip again, clamming up again, pulling my punches all over again, Ronit eventually, and my peer reviewers, by the way, Stephanie, at Wayne State University Press, they were there to help me dig deeper and scratch harder than I ever imagined possible. Until I finally figured out what my adventures in storytelling was about. What it was really about. And I'm going to tell you. Oh, actually, we're writers, so I won't just tell you, I'll show you. This may look familiar to some of you who have read the book, or Anne, you know what's happening next, because the parent-teachers sessions, you asked me, is it true? Yes, it's true. What's this? This is not a rhetorical question. What is this? What does this look like? Hello? Oh, you're muted. Okay. So yes, it's a line. I'll do the work for you, only because you're muted. It's a line, a straight line. Yes, of course, but it's also a symbol. You know, in creativity world, it's also a metaphor for the surface. It's a metaphor for the surface. Okay, here's the deal. This is your enemy. The surface is your nemesis. It's up here, above the surface, nothing new. It's all been said before. It's all been done before. No surprises, no bombshells. Get out of there if this is where you're spending your time writing. What you want to do is go below the surface. Yes? To what I call the good stuff. I can see some of you nodding your head. You've read the book. You know what's coming, right? The good stuff. I really should do PowerPoint, but it doesn't work. So the question is, how do you get from the surface? How do you get below the surface to the good stuff? How do you crack the hardened, concrete-like surface? Because it's there for a reason. It's there to protect, you know, the good stuff. How do you get beyond the surface to the good stuff? Right? And the answer is, anybody have any ideas? Okay, there's only one way I know how. I'm sorry, Jennifer, but you know, should I do it again? No, I've never seen so many heads shaking at one time. You get the picture. Hence, how could I not call the book, forget about Detroit and the Art of the Impossible. I'll have to do that some other time, if I'm interested, because this is a real spoiler. Once you go this deep and this far below the surface to get to the good stuff, it's hard to go back and tell other people's stories, but we'll see.